Good morning, everybody, and welcome to you all to our second of our three organic webinars that we're having this week. And our topic for discussion this morning is organic tillage. And joining me today is my colleague Martin Bourke. And Martin is an organic tillage specialist based in the Gorey office in Wexford. Good morning, Martin.
Good morning, Elaine. How are you? I'm just going to take my video off now. Good morning, everybody. Yeah.
I
How
said,
are you?
Martin, I suppose maybe this morning, just to give an overview, you're going to give an overview of the organic tillage sector. You're going to look at the demands, opportunities, the challenges on a technical side of people. I suppose you're aiming at people maybe that's in organics already, thinking of growing organic cereals. And then I suppose you're talking to people that now with the organic farming scheme open, that they might be considering joining the organic tillage. So you're going to cover a good bit in your presentation.
Yeah.
So before I hand you over to Martin, what I will say to you is the question and answers function is there. Put in your questions as we go along. And when Martin is finished, then we'll open the floor and we'll get through all the questions that we can. So Martin, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Elaine. I'll just share my screen here now, folks. Hopefully this all goes according to plan. And press this button here. You can tell me now in a second.
Yep.
Yeah, just give it a chance to catch up with me. Let's see here now. Okay, and then display settings. Now, how does that look, Elaine?
All good to go there, Martin?
The full screen, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, lovely. Okay, sure. Look, I suppose just to introduce myself for those of you that don't know me. Yeah, Martin Bourke is my name. I'm a Wicklow man, and I've been in this job just, I suppose, for about a year and a half now, nearly. And I'm from a conventional tillage farm all my life, and was actually a conventional tillage advisor for 21 years and a teacher in Kildalton before that. So I suppose I bring a very much conventional mindset to the party, I would say, or would have up until a year and a half ago, but I would have certainly changed my way of thinking the more I delved into organics and what it involved, and realizing there is another way to farm and certainly another way to grow crops. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me anyway, and so much so actually that we converted our home farm, some of it 75 acres, to organic tillage there, and we went into the scheme last January. So that's just a little bit about myself. So we'll move on here now. Most of you already know the figures, how we managed to double our numbers literally overnight there last year in December when the scheme closed. So we went from about 2,000 farmers to 4,000. The average farm size there is 47 hectares. And we have almost 200,000 hectares of land now organic, about 4% or just over 4% of the land area. And we know that this target is to be, increased to 7.5% by 2027 and 10% by 2030. So if that were to happen, that would mean by 2030 we'd have about 10,000 farmers farming organically nationally. And then about just under 90% of those are beef and sheep farmers. Now, so I suppose, why am I here this morning? And I suppose, or why are some of you tuning in maybe this morning, especially some of you who may be conventional tillage farmers here in the audience. And you've probably seen already there are very attractive payment rates for organic tillage farmers. Okay. And there's a breakdown of the payment rates of the different sectors, but I just want to focus on the tillage this morning. So if we look there, the scheme is a 5-year scheme. And in the first 2 years of the scheme, you'll receive a payment of €320 a hectare on the first 70 hectares in the first 2 years, okay? And then after that, in years 3 to 5 of the scheme, you receive €270 a hectare. If you have more than 70 hectares, then you also receive €60 a hectare in the first 2 years on anything from 70 upwards, and €30 a hectare in years 3 to 5 if you have more than 70 hectares on those extra hectares. The other interesting thing, I suppose, about this scheme is just a participation payment, which is great. It covers some of those initial costs, like getting a conversion plan drawn up, your licensing fee. So there's a participation payment there of €2,000 in the first year, and then you get €1,400 as a participation payment then in the next 4 years, from years 2 to 5. So as you can see, look, very, very attractive rates of payment. How does that translate then into, certain sizes of farm? So there's just a few examples. So if, for example, I'm a 10-hectare farmer, or I bring 10 hectares of land into organic, there's a payment over 5 years would come to 22,000 You know, if you're 70 hectares in, you could bring in a huge payment there of 109,000 into your farm. So certainly it's well worth considering. Okay. So what are the opportunities then for tillage farmers to go organic? And I see it as the big one is the first point there, that you know, and this is obviously what we did on our home farm. We might not have the confidence to go completely the whole farm organic yet if it's a large farm, but to dip your toe in the water and go for the partial conversion. So you don't have to convert all your farm if you're a tillage farmer. So there's this concept of a partial conversion. Okay. Um, there's no chemical fertilizer obviously allowed, or no chemicals allowed when you're organic farming. And so on that part of the farm, if you go for a partial conversion, obviously you can't use your chemical fertilizers or chemicals on the organic part of the farm. It'll be 2 years then before the farm gets full organic status. Okay, so that applies whether you go for the partial option or you convert all your farm organic. It takes 2 years for your land to become full symbol, to have the status of being organic. And if you did go down the route of partial conversion, I suppose the one thing you can't do is you can't grow the same crop on both parts of your farm. So, for example, the crops that we grew on the 75 acres we put into the organic part of the farm this year were different than the crops we had on the other 300 or 400 acres. Okay, so it's just and that's just in that given season. So next year it could flip flop around. The crops that we had on the conventional side of the farm, that type of species could happen to be on the organic, but you just can't have them on both sides of your farm in the same season. Okay, and that would be particularly just a different species of crop. So we couldn't have, for example, you know, spring oats and winter oats on both sides, because at the end of the day, it could be the same variety. All that's different is it was sown at a different time, but it still looks the same when it's harvested. So it's just something to consider. The last point on this slide then is the one I suppose that would, you know, catch the attention of a lot of tillage growers, would be to see, you know, first of all, you know, it's the price premium that's available for growing organic feed. And last winter, you know, the organic feed ration was costing from 850 to 950 euros per ton, the imported ration. Now, I'm not saying an Irish grower charges 850 euros a ton for ration, but there's certainly a market there to be tapped into for tillage growers, significantly higher than what they would receive for their conventional feed if they were selling it to the merchant at the moment as things stand. So in order to actually examine this last year, the Department of Agriculture to look at the market, because we were a little bit sort of guessing, driving, I suppose, without the lights on, trying to figure out what was the demand out there. So the Department of Agriculture carried out a survey in early March last year, and they sent out this survey to all the 4,000 organic farmers, and they received almost 1,200 responses, which was terrific. And out of that, the demand, you know, what they were looking for, the questions that were asked. So, for example, about 1,500 tons, just over that, of legume grain mix was, which would be commonly known as a combi crop or combination crop. So that's your mixture of either your pea or your bean with your cereal. And there'd be a demand arising out of that of about 1,500 tons, a demand for straight organic grain, wheat, oats, barley, of 1,500 plus tons, and then a strong demand as well for organic concentrates, beef or sheep concentrates, over 8,000 tons. There's also, you know, out of that survey, they realized there was a strong demand for forages, about 9,000 plus tons of either silage, hay, or red clover silage. Now, to remember, I said about about 1,200 respondents responded out of the 4,000, so just under a third. So what I did with the figures myself then was, look, I doubled them. I assumed that what if, okay, more people had responded to the survey, it should, you know, what would you say, turn into something like this if you were to try and guess. So I multiplied by 2. I didn't multiply by 3. I didn't want to get carried away. So I tried to be some way conservative or realistic in my assumptions. So if you were to double the figures, well then, you know, that the amount of feed required, there would be 3,000 ton of legume grain mix, 3,000 of the straight grain, and 16,000 tons of concentrates. And then if you add in what's currently been grown for flahavans, which is about 9,300 tons in the 2022 season, and whites took in about 900 tons for human consumption as well in 2022. And then The other bits and pieces between small mills, making flour from old heritage varieties and so on, or distilleries and so on, it would amount to maybe up to 1,000. So if we add all these bits and pieces together, we can see there's a demand of about 33,000 tons. Now, can we meet that demand, or what is currently being grown organically in this country? So the latest figures we would have would be from 2022. There was 3,522 hectares of organic cereals. And of that, about 70% of that, which would be 2,300 hectares of that, is organic oats. So you can see in 2022 that there was roughly then, if we add those, figures, together, if we add in the 660 hectares that came into the scheme that were as well of tillage that entered the scheme in last December, if we add all the bits and pieces together, you can see that those figures don't add up to just more than around 4,000 to 4,500 hectares of organic tillage production in Ireland at the moment. But there's a 33,000 ton requirement. So, you'd have to be yielding somewhere between 9 and 10 tons per hectare at the moment currently to meet that requirement, which no organic crops would be doing. They'd be down at, 3.5, 4.5 to 5 tons per hectare. So you can see we could safely double the area and meet that demand at the moment. So there is scope for more organic tillage area at the moment. But it's easy for me to say there's scope, but how do you get to that market is the key challenge. Okay, so if there is a market for 33,000 tons, how do we join it up? The routes to the feed market, and where to sell, and this is where you have to be. You don't have that luxury of the merchant and being able to deliver something in and that's it, gone, and you get paid for it. So you do need to figure out how you're going to join up with that end user, and a lot of those are in the west of Ireland. Okay, the other thing you need to consider, is as well, have you got the storage? Are you set up to do that? So not everyone is. Okay, you may have to hold that grain until maybe December, January for resale. Have you got that kind of facility to store grain for long-term selling? Do you want the hassle of it? It's not everyone's cup of tea, farm to farm trading. Now, one of the things that has made it easier, and the Department of Agriculture and NOTS launched the Organic Trading Hub there back at the Ploughing Match Week. And this is a fantastic resource. And this is what it looks like when you go in on the website, the organictradinghub.ie. And that's a facility there and it's effectively, I suppose, it's like a done deal trading hub, but it's free to put your ad up and place it. And you can say what you have for sale, and other organic farmers then can go in and see what's for sale and so on. So that's a fantastic resource to have, okay, for farm to farm selling. As I say, look, we currently have no organic, large organic only animal feed mill in Ireland. So, could maybe potentially farmers group together, tillage farmers come together and form an efficient supply chain. One tillage farmer has maybe plenty of shed storage space. Someone else maybe has the on-farm dryer. Someone else has the machinery and so on. But if you were to group together and you bring that cash flow together, maybe you could be in a position to form some sort of a supply chain with the end customer. Okay. Leaving the market now and just looking at some of the technical challenges, and the big one, and I know, when I suggest organic tillage farming to some conventional tillage farmers, they'll always say, no, sure, weeds is the big one that's thrown at you. And, there is life outside the chemical toolbox, and there are other ways to control weeds. And it is more challenging, I'm not going to lie, but the solutions are there. And if you're very good with attention to detail and good planning, a lot of these problems can be overcome. So like the first one, and this applies to organic or to conventional tillage growers, and it comes back to good crop rotation. And I was at the ECT conference there last week, the Enable Conservation Tillage conference, and there are certain issues arising with difficult to control grass weeds. And one of the there's different solutions, but rotation was one of the most effective ways of reducing the amount of weed burden on these farms. And it's the very same with organic farming, where you don't have any herbicide that you can use. So one of the, I suppose, foundations of a good long-term plan on your farm is to have a good rotation, to have a sustainable rotation. And it may well be, you know, obviously in the organic situation, you bring in like a grass or a lay or a red clover into the rotation. It's probably something that more conventional farmers could do to try and maybe alleviate some of the issues they have with grass weeds as well. But this is something that you would consider in the organic farming situation. Plus, it's going to, you know, the legume is going to leave a lovely residue, a kick of nitrogen into the system. So it's going to keep your fertility good. False seed beds is another thing. I can remember years and years ago, my father doing this kind of thing, and you know, ploughing early and then running a harrow over the land to try and stimulate weeds to grow, and then coming back in when that flush of weeds has come with another run of the harrow, taking that population out. So you're trying to reduce the weed bank before you sow the crop. So cover crops, you know, keeping the ground covered over autumn, over winter, so that, you know, you don't have bare stubble and that you can maybe keep weeds suppressed and keep them down. This is one then as well, you know, and again, some, you know, work in the UK would often see where they were trying to reduce the amount of black grass on farms, you know, increasing your seeding rates was one effective tool. One, you know, not obviously didn't eliminate it, but it was one of the tools used. And what I would say in organic farming is you're trying to, if you can't use herbicides to control the weeds, you need to have a competitive crop growing. So the crop is doing the work of the herbicide. So you need to sow it at a higher than normal seeding rate to make that crop more competitive. And also the variety you pick is very important. Okay, some varieties will have taller straws than others. And, you know, inevitably some greenery will come back up and weeds will come back up through the organic crop as the season goes on. And the taller the variety, the less chance it has of coming up high and, you know, making combining difficult. Here's a photograph taken there on an organic farm this year. I'll just get rid of this thing here. Yeah. So this is a crop of organic spring oats, a very, very good crop of organic spring oats. In a normal year, it probably would have done 2.5 tons per acre, but it did yield just over 2 tons per acre. And one of the reasons I would say why this crop ended up so successfully was it was sown at a very high seeding rate. Okay, it was actually sown at 16 stone per acre. The other thing was the variety was Isabel, which has a very good straw. It's, you know, it won't break down as quick as other varieties. But had that crop, you know, been sown possibly not as thick or a different variety, we could have ended up with the greenery coming back up through it. Because if you look at the stubble on the right hand side of the photo, you can see there was weeds, you know, in the crop, but they were down very low and they didn't make their way up through the canopy. So they weren't an issue at harvest time. Okay, so it's just the importance of, you know, good high seeding rate, make the crop competitive, and your variety selection. Like here's another photograph. There is a picture of, as I mentioned, varieties. Okay, variety selection is very important. Like that lovely tall variety in the middle of the center of that photograph is the variety Isabel, and you can see it's standing very, very well. And beside it are other varieties that are completely broken down, and you can see, you know, grass starting to come back up through them. So it is important to choose your variety carefully, no matter what the crop. Okay, this photograph was taken down in Duncannon where there was variety trials, spring oat variety trials. But I saw the very same thing in the spring barley variety trials, and there was a couple of spring barleys were much better in terms of straw breakdown than others in an organic situation. So companion crops then is the next one, and intercrops. And just to show you, like combi crops or intercropping, how competitive they can be. This is another way of, you know, you grow crops that are competitive by nature. There's a photograph of an organic combi crop, intercrop of oats and peas, and it's extremely competitive. You know, peas by their nature are very competitive. I suppose one of the reasons why straight peas aren't grown too often conventionally is because they lodge, but they do tend to cover the ground. You know, they're very good for smothering weeds, but you put a cereal crop in with it as well, and you get a very, very good crop that's competitive at outcompeting weeds. And just to highlight that point of another photograph I took here down in Kildalton College there back in June or July. And if you look carefully there, on the right-hand side there, you have a crop of winter wheat. But then there's a strip about 1 metre wide there, up along there, of cleavers. You can see growing very, very densely. And that was kind of an uncultivated area between the two crops, because on the left-hand side, we have a combi crop of oats and peas, but the cleavers weren't an issue at all. in the oats and peas. And the only reason I took that photo is just to show you that was a dirty site from a weed point of view, a very dirty site. There was a lot of cleavers if they were let flourish. So it just highlights just how competitive a combi crop is naturally against weeds with no herbicides being applied there. Okay. And then the last, I suppose, weapon that's that you can use against weeds, I suppose, is the mechanical weed technology that's out there. And this is, I suppose, technology is moving at such a fast rate. But here's just one example of a machine. This is a tined weeding machine. It's a precision tine weeder, it's called. It's a Trefler machine. And you can certainly see the way it works. It goes right across the rows. It doesn't grow. It's not trying to sort out weeds in between the rows. It's actually pulling that was a crop of spring oats, and it will do a little bit of damage to the spring oat as well, but it tends to recover after 5 or 6 days. But it's a way of taking out weeds mechanically. Ideally, what you're doing with a machine like that is you're taking out weeds at a very young cotyledon stage, just before or just as they're appearing over ground, or just when they're under the ground at the peri-emergent stage. But I suppose just to highlight, there are other ways of controlling weeds, and it doesn't have to revolve around chemistry. So other challenges then, look, getting more nitrogen into the system. Now, this probably doesn't really apply so much to those of you that have an organic, maybe have a livestock enterprise as well on the farm, and you have your own manure, and you're able to get that manure, the farmyard manure, out onto the tillage fields and maintain fertility. And you have probably legume, like you have grass in the rotation and red clover, so you're rotating your crops after the grass lay. But for a stockless tillage farmer going organic, it is more of a challenge. You want to get nitrogen into the system, and the ways to do it then, I suppose, then my next point there is access to organic manures. So you need to, what are the organic manures that you can use, first of all, when you're growing organic? So you could import, if you want to import cattle slurry, okay, so long as it's not from a unit that has, a feedlot unit. So from any dairy farm effectively, or cattle farm, cattle slurry, you can take in dairy sludge. You could take in farmyard manure from any farmer, and you can take in poultry manure from a free range system or an organic poultry system, not the barn system or not the conventional type poultry. And pigs, then you wouldn't take in pig slurry unless it was outdoor, unless it was like a free range pig unit or some sort. You could. So non-intensive systems, effectively, you can take the dung or the slurries in from those systems. Okay, so I suppose the key is to be able to have a source of that, really, because you do want to maintain your fertility. You don't want to have to be using maybe these expensive specialty products, and products like ground rock phosphate or sulfate of potash. They are expensive fertilizers, and the whole idea is we're trying to, I suppose, get off this extremely expensive treadmill of trying to grow crops in this country, and try and do it, as cheaply as we can, but not neglecting soil fertility. We have to still remember that there will be offtakes when you cut those crops. The offtakes won't be as high because the yields won't be as high, but you still have to match them. There's no point in running the well dry in terms of your soil fertility, and then 5 years later realizing you've run maybe your phosphorus is down to a very low index 1. So it's important to have a good plan in place. Legumes, would be the backbone of any good organic rotation. It's very important to have a legume component in the rotation, to boost your soil fertility, to boost the nitrogen. Bringing in something like the combi crops, the intercropping cropping as well, the red clover. It's all important. It's all part of a long-term rotation to make your system sustainable. Okay, and there are other ways of doing things. There is new technological developments as well in organic manures happening the whole time, and it's going to make this easier, especially for a stockless tillage farmer like we are at home. And one such example of those is the pelleted poultry manure there. So that's a picture. It looks like calf nuts, but that's a poultry manure pellet. It came from a free range or organic poultry house, and the manure was turned in and was pelletized, and that can be spread then with your conventional spinner, okay, your conventional fertilizer spreader. Preferably, it spreads easier with something like a breed oil spreader. Okay, but it's just to highlight that the technology is there. That in terms of profile is very like an 18:6:12 fertilizer. That in terms of the ratio of N, P, and K, if I was to pick one out, and to be able to have that opportunity to put something into the growing crop in the middle of the season, if you feel there is a shortage of nitrogen, that's a great thing to have if you're an organic tillage farmer without the organic manures. Okay, so and look, there is other technologies happening, stuff like separating cattle slurry, the liquid fraction from the solid fraction. Maybe the solid fraction then can be transported further. It'll be a source of phosphorus. We have dairy sludges that are available in some areas if you're near a dairy processing facility. So, that's very, very good source of phosphorus. So there are organic manures or technologies available so that every farmer should be able to find a solution to keep their fertility right. Okay, moving on to margins. So I suppose, we have to be realistic in what kind of crop yields we think we can get organically. We're not going to be getting conventional yields. So we have to be realistic about what we expect we can get. I suppose I'm going to look at what the volatility of input and output prices has in a conventional and an organic system, just to show you which system is more resilient. And, I'll be asking that question, like, does the organic system have a better cushion against price volatility? So we'll have a look at some of the figures then. So, and I've taken the 2023 harvest figures. And what I have here is a conventional crop of spring oats down along the left-hand side and all the costs associated with it. Okay. What I've done is my grain assumptions and my yield assumptions are on the right-hand side of the screen. So what I've taken is the grain of this was the conventional price paid for conventional oats by Glanbia there, or Tirlán there, that they announced there in September. And then I've taken what was paid by Flahavans for the oats that was delivered in there as well in September. And the yields I have taken here is I've taken the average 5-year yield for conventional, which is 7.2 tons per hectare. Okay, that's equivalent to 2.9 tons per acre. And I've taken an organic yield of 4 tons per hectare, which is 1.6. Now you can argue this up or down. As I say, that crop I showed you a picture of a minute ago yielded 5 tons per hectare, but it was in a very good rotation. And there are other crops of organic oats that yielded, as little as maybe 0.7 of a ton to the acre this year on, ground that's tilling longer, that's maybe run out of a bit of fertility and so on. But there's variation. There'll always be variations in yield. But I've taken what I consider a good average yield. Okay, so 4 tons per hectare. Similarly, on the conventional side, I don't think too many conventional crops of spring oats actually yielded the 5-year yield this year. Okay, they were possibly much lower. But look, this was a unique harvest, and hopefully we don't see too many of these into the future. But taking the 2023 figures, you can see there that it's the big one, I suppose, is the total variable costs figure in the middle. It cost €1,542 a hectare to grow conventional spring oats this year. And by far, the biggest portion of that obviously was the fertilizer costs. Okay, so the fertilizer costs were exceptionally high. So that is one of the reasons why the conventional margin is so poor this year. Okay, it was an extremely expensive growing year, and yields didn't materialize the way we wanted. But the yield I have in this exercise is actually the 5-year average. But you can see there, the gross margin you're left with there is about €112 a hectare. If we take the organic spring oats delivered into, say, Flahavans and getting your 385 a ton, and at a good yield of 4 tons per hectare, you can sort of see, I suppose the big one is the variable costs are much lower. Okay, 702. What I should point out is what I've built into the machinery operations, because I have zero down for fertilizer for the organic spring oats, but that's actually factored in. I factored in if you were applying 3,000 gallons of cattle slurry. I've put the cost of what that would cost you to apply. I've assumed you get it for free, you import it for free, but you pay for the spreading of it. And that's factored into the machinery operations figure there of 450. So because there'll be a lot of other machinery operations you don't incur when you're organic, as you can effectively close the gate after it's sown. So that's where that figure is in there. So look, you can see a huge difference in the gross margin in the bottom line. I factored in €250 a hectare for the straw chopping scheme for both crops. And so, we're talking €1,000 versus €112 a hectare. That's a significant gap in margin. And the other thing is we haven't factored in the organic farming scheme payments into those figures either. So if you were to add those on, you'd be adding €270 a hectare on, because if you're growing organic spring oats and getting the premium, the full premium price, that's the assumption is you're fully organic. You'd be in, your land is converted, you'd be getting the 270 rate of payment. Okay. Now, what if you are someone that considers going organic? So if there's conventional tillage growers in this audience and you want to go for the scheme this autumn and you start in January and you decide to sow oats next year, but what if you had done it this year? So I suppose, what if you're like my brother here at home? We'll have a look at that figure. So if you're in that situation and you've no premium, so you can see there that it's the very same as if you were growing the organic spring crop, but the only difference is you're getting €195 a ton on that 4 tons a hectare. So you can still see, you're getting a margin there of 328 a hectare versus conventional crop of 112. So it's still well out in front. But the other thing to remember is that you would be in year one of the scheme. So you'd be also getting the 320 rate of organic payment there at the bottom. So you'd have 320 and your 328. So actually, you'd nearly be about €650 of a hectare of a gross margin if you include the organic payment. So again, significantly ahead, and that would be just in year one. So, I suppose what's interesting is if you weren't even in the organic farming scheme payment and you didn't get that 320 and you tried to grow the crop organically to organic standards this year, as it turns out, you probably would have made more money, all right, than the conventional grower that went to all the trouble of spending €1,500 a hectare. I suppose that just highlights how serious the situation is for the conventional tillage system in Ireland, that it's just become so expensive to grow crops. And I always say, do your own sums. Yeah, every farm is unique, but it's important you do your own sums. Now, can you see that, Elaine? I might have to bring this back down a bit now. So what I've done here, what I've attempted to do here is compare a 7-year rotation of organic versus a 7-year conventional rotation. And I did something similar like this last June. I've just updated the figures a little bit. But effectively, what I did on the organics was I assumed that the first 2 years would be in red clover, building up the fertility. And there wouldn't be much, we'll say, income from it in the first year by the time you establish the crop and pay for your establishment costs, even with the red clover payment. But by year 2, then you would be selling, hopefully, in or around 20 bales per acre of red clover bales. And that'll be your gross margin there, $420 an acre. Then in years 3, in 2025, year 3, you could maybe, this is just suggestion, and there's all sorts of blueprints. This is just one suggested rotation. And if you were to grow winter wheat there and get 1.8 tons to the acre winter wheat, it's in the choice rotation, it's in the choice slot after 2 years of a fertility build-up. So it should yield well, it should go well. Then in the next year after that, then maybe you would consider something like spring oats, okay? Because maybe the weed bank will start to develop and get a little bit stronger, a little bit more weeds. So you'd put in a crop like oats that might be more competitive. Oats has the allelopathic characteristic, which makes it naturally competitive against weeds. Then you might decide, rather than trying to grow oats or cereal crop in year 2027, the weeds might be starting to build up, and you might want to nip that in the bud and bring in a highly competitive crop. So you bring in your combi crop or or a full intercrop in that year. So I mentioned the intercropping, I suppose, as a combi crop of a mixture of, so far I mentioned a mixture of cereals with a legume. But there is work being done there, Sheila Alves in Oak Park, and there's some very promising work on looking at putting 2 legumes together. So intercropping peas with beans. And as I mentioned before, the peas is very competitive, but the risk is they could lodge if they were grown as a solo crop. Beans, on the other hand, can be quite an open crop, not the most competitive against weeds. So when you put the 2 together, what you're doing then is you're getting the complementarity between the 2 crops, and the beans will act as a scaffold for the peas to prevent them lodging over. But the peas then act as a crop to smother out the weeds for the beans, and the 2 together complement one another very well. And I suppose the challenge over the next few years, and with Sheila's research, will be to try and find the winning combination of finding suitable varieties of peas to go with suitable variety of beans that they'll ripen, try and get them to ripen closer together. But it's got great potential, this kind of work. And if hopefully by 2027 we'll have cracked a winning formula there. So that's why I've stuck it into the rotation there in that year. And if you did, that would be entitled to a full protein payment as well there. of €200 an acre because there'd be no cereal in it. So that could bring in a very, very good gross margin. As well as that, then you've brought the legume component back, and you should leave a lovely fertility in the ground for the following crop in 2028 then of winter wheat. So you'll be looking at 1.8 tons of winter wheat. I'm just going to move this back up here now again. Catch that and bring it up. There we catch it there maybe. Right. So, yeah, so you'd have, good yield of winter wheat after the beans. And then you go back to something again, a crop that has more competition in it, more naturally competitive like oats in 2029. 2030 then and beyond, you'd probably possibly go back to 2 years of red clover again then to kind of, press the restart button, get the fertility right again, get on top of weeds and so on. But that's just one example. And I'm not saying it's the right or the wrong example. It's one suggestion. And, you can tweak that. Everyone might have certain soil types that can't do certain things, or they have a preference for certain crops. It's also about knowing the biology of your weeds. You may decide to grow winter oats as opposed to spring oats if you have a lot of spring germinating weeds. So there's different reasons why certain crops will be chosen in a rotation. The assumptions I made in that example there at the bottom were that the organic grain would be €400 a ton, the red clover you'd get €45 a bale, and the full intercrop would be worth €500 a ton. Okay, they were the assumptions in that one. So moving on, if it'll move on for me, let's see. Yeah, so this is then the conventional rotation. I won't spend as long on this one really because I know most of the audience are probably organic, but I'll just drag this down a bit. So you can see what I've done is, look, I just compared it with a good 7-year conventional rotation. This is what you would consider a good rotation if you were a conventional crops grower. So you would have your break crops in the mix. So you have your beans in 2023, followed by your winter wheat, winter barley, winter rice, and so on. And I've put in very, very good yields, 4.25 ton of winter wheat, 4 ton of winter barley. And I've factored in, I didn't factor in, it would be unfair if I was to put in the 2023 growing costs because they were exceptionally high because of what was happening with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So what I've assumed in these costs was obviously that fertilizer costs will be back 50% on where they were in 2023. And then I've kind of used current prices of where they were at this year's harvest prices. And I've assumed seed costs would be back as well, seeing as grain costs are back. So that was kind of, I would call them very fair assumptions. And I'll move on to, I suppose, if I was to add up the gross margin from that 7-year conventional rotation and compare it to the 7-year organic rotation I showed you a minute ago. I'll just see if I can move this up. Yeah. So there is a summary of where things would be at. So the 7-year rotation would leave you a margin of around 450 an acre, and the conventional 7-year rotation is 287 an acre. And look, as I say, that's just one analysis, and it's assuming good yields on both systems. And so but I suppose the main message from it is the organic rotation long term does compare very, very favorably for those of you that are considering it. That it's certainly they do stack up. And what I didn't include in that analysis, I didn't add into that analysis was the organic farming scheme payment. So the 270 to the 320 a hectare. The reason I didn't is we don't know, will that always be there into the future, a scheme? So you've got to be able to see, does your enterprise stack up on its own 2 feet without any scheme? So that's why I didn't include it, but they could be added on to the figures there. So look, just to conclude then on the points I've raised, I suppose, is just look, the short-term market is very good for organic grain, particularly the animal feed market. It's just getting there is the issue. The payment rates are very attractive. The profitability we've seen compares very favorably versus conventional tillage. I think the partial conversion is a great option for tillage farmers. We certainly have room right now for another 4,000 hectares of organic tillage to meet the current demand. Should we reach the 2030 target, okay, which will be 10,000 farms, then the area of organic tillage would actually need to be about 20,000 hectares required to meet that demand, okay? And then I'll just drag this up again. And then, my last point there would be the route to market is certainly, the biggest concern, okay? It's not just a case of, delivering it into your local merchant. So there is a little bit more work involved in selling your crop, okay? So now I'm just going to move on to one last section. I keep moving this around. I don't know why it won't go away. I'll put it down here now. So for those of you that aren't in the Organic Farmer Scheme and are considering it, how do I join? So effectively what you do next, if the screen will move, whatever it is now. So there are two organic certification bodies in Ireland. We have the Irish Organic Association and the Organic Trust. And so you choose one of those and you make contact with them and you produce a conversion plan and submit a conversion plan to the organic certification body. That's step one. Step two then is you apply for the scheme. So there's a portal on agfood.ie in your agfood account, or your advisor can do it for you, but just make sure you actually apply for the scheme. So that's done on agfood.ie, and that has to be done by the closing date of the 8th of December. Then the next thing is don't just assume everything is then done and dusted. In 2024, actually, okay? So what you want to make sure is when you're filling out your BIS application with your advisor, let them know that you've gone organic and or else partially organic, and tell them which parcels are in the organic farming scheme, so that you can then correctly click the right drop down arrow to say what crop is in it and whether it's in. It'll be for you guys that are going in new, you'll be ticking in conversion for the parcels that are gone organic. Okay, so it's just important that there's a bit of time and care taken with your BIS application to do it right. Okay, and then finally then step 4 is just to complete then a 25-hour organic principles course. Okay, and Teagasc runs these courses, Knots runs these courses. There's several of them on offer during the year, but the most important thing is that would be done before October of next year. So I think I have it written there. Yeah. So by the 1st of October 2024, that you try and get that course done. It's an excellent course. It's also, as I say, there's a bit of work involved maybe in your route to market. To me, that's your first step on the route to market. You're making contacts, you're networking on those courses with potential buyers for your grain. So I think, that's there. It's well worthwhile doing that course. And then, oh yeah, just to highlight as well, then I'm sure you'll mention this as well at the end, Elaine, but we're having another webinar then tomorrow morning. This was the first, this was the second of 3. We had one on dairy yesterday. This is tillage, and then tomorrow we're having a webinar at the same time at 11 o'clock on horticulture. My colleague William Deasy will be presenting that. So I'll stop sharing my screen there now, Elaine, I think, at that point.
Okay, Martin, that was a very good whistle-stop tour.
Yeah.
Maybe just a couple of questions. I'll just ask people to start putting questions there in the questions and answers, and I'll let people do that. Maybe a couple of questions that came to mind myself. Just in relation, Martin, as regards the 2-year conversion, when do you have a cereal crop fully converted, or what's that kind of?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. So we joined, our farm joined the scheme on the 1st of January, just gone past 11 months ago. And we sowed crops in the spring then this year. Okay, so that's a year 1 crop. Next year we will grow crops again in the spring, and that's a year 2 crop. Okay, and if we grow a crop in the spring in year 3, that'll be so what we harvest in the 2025 year will be fully organic. Now, what won't be fully organic would be if next year, for example, in year 2, we decided to sow a winter cereal in October.
Yep.
Even though that's harvested in 2025, it won't be fully organic because our ground when we sowed that crop wasn't 2 years in the scheme. So the soil, I suppose, the field needs to be 2 years from your startup date before you sow into that field, I suppose is the easiest way to explain it. So anything we sow in the spring of 2025 is fully organic. Anything we sow in the autumn of 2024 wouldn't be yet. So I suppose that's the easiest way to explain that one, Elaine. Yeah. And but in saying that, one of the advantages, I suppose, we did bring in a crop last year that was already sown. So don't think that if I want to bring land into the organic farming scheme on the 1st of January, that it can't be a field that's already been sown and has actually received some inputs. So it was a last minute decision. We decided to stick an extra 25 acres in. It just so happened that it was in a crop already, and we had done some weed control on it. So from the 1st of January onwards, though, we couldn't go near that with chemical fertilizer or chemicals. It was managed organically from there on in. So you do, that's another option, that you can choose whatever field you like on your farm effectively, but just, I suppose, to be strategic.
Yeah. So it's the first crop 2 years anyway is the golden rule anyway.
Yeah. Um,
Just might be some viewers here in front of us this morning, Martin, and there might be a conventional tillage farmer, and you've mentioned the organic farming scheme is open and are seriously thinking about going in and going to start conversion if they go in from the 1st of January. Maybe I know it's a very open question, but what tips would you give somebody that's just nearly there? But
yeah. Okay. If you're okay, I suppose I'll break it down as you say. If you're a conventional farmer at the moment, and what shouldn't you do or should do? Well, what I would do is be very careful what crop you choose in year one, because in year one you're selling that anyway as a conventional crop. It's not, it won't be until you get into the second year. So in year one, don't grow growing a crop that you can't just deliver up the road to your merchant. Because at the end of the day, that's probably where it's going to end up. I know someone who tried to grow one of the combi crops last year. They were in year one. And now all of a sudden, who was going to buy it? Because an organic farmer can't buy it because it's year one. So, and a merchant wasn't really set up to take a combi crop. So think cleverly in year one. Keep it simple. Grow a straight cereal crop or something that can be sold into the local merchant, or make sure you have a market, whether it's fodder beet or whatever, but that that you have someone that's definitely buying that crop off you is what I would say. So that's the first thing I would say to you. The next thing I would say is think strategically. If you're a conventional farmer, and think, when I mean strategic, what fields are you going to put into the organic farming scheme? If you have a choice of fields and you decide to go for the partial conversion, I would say stay clear maybe of the fields that are the dirtiest with wild oats or something. Try and pick the cleaner fields from a weed point of view. Maybe try and pick the fields with the best fertility. So something that maybe is close to coming out of a lay, a grass lay. So the other tip I would say is, before you do it, maybe you should see, have you got a source of organic manures? It makes it a lot easier. As I say, if you're bringing in a field into organic farming and it's already been tilled for 30 or 40 years of tillage,
mm,
that's going to go hungry looking for nitrogen quite
yeah.
quickly. Nitrogen does drive growth, and you've got to consider, have you got an organic manure to bring it in, or else you go down the route of the red clover to build up your fertility a couple of years. And again, before you do it, you think, have you got a neighboring farmer who might buy red clover silage off you? A non-organic farmer in year one might buy red clover silage. So there's a bit of thought, a bit of planning required, I suppose, is what I'm saying, Elaine. It's not just straightforward. And then the key thing is to network. I keep saying, for example, that 25-hour course is a good starting point. You're networking, you're meeting future customers, and you're building up relationships, and you're in this game a lot longer than I am, Elaine, and I'd say you know that you've seen that
Yeah.
happen
Oh,
over the years.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's key. Yeah.
yeah.
Maybe just you did mention that you can bring in manures, cattle slurries, and all the rest. Supposing you just can't get that, and maybe you're in a stockless rotation, and you do need P's and K's.
Mm.
What are you permitted, or what is available to you?
Yeah, well, that's where I think the game changer possibly has come in there last April, when that company, they started formulating the poultry manure pellet. So that's something that can come in, that you could import into the like that you can buy and spread with your own fertilizer spinner, and it's fully organic product, fully approved, and that's one way of doing it, definitely. But it's priced in a way that it would be equivalent to buying a bag of fertilizer, so it isn't cheap, but look, at nitrogen drives growth. You want to maintain your P's and K's. You don't want to, okay, straw chopping will replace a lot of the K, and some of the P. But when you're removing it in the grain, you still have to meet your nutrient offtakes. So I suppose that's one I can think. There are new technologies coming along too, but there are specialty fertilizers too. I call them specialty fertilizers, but
Mm.
they are more expensive, like the sulfate of potashes, the polysulfate, the ground rock phosphate. So those products are available, and I suppose too, like, and obviously, whether you're conventional or whether you're organic, good farming is good farming, and liming is still so important
Mm.
to have your
Yeah.
pHs right. So that is allowed, obviously, So it may well cost more, all right, if you can't use we call it, what I would call the raw organic manures, the slurries and so on. They are the most cost effective way of maintaining your fertility.
Okay.
Uh,
And maybe just kind of a big picture question in relation to Teagasc. Maybe is there
mm.
any organic research or trial work in the pipeline as regards organic cereals and tillage?
Yeah, we have. I tell you what, we have just started there this year is our Growing Organics Monitor Farm program. So we have 11, I think soon to become maybe 12 or 13, but we have organic monitor farms around the country, and we are going to use those farms to carry out on-farm trials. and there'll be on-farm tillage research trials on those farms as well. So, this year as well, I would have had a trial down in Duncannon there, tagged on to the Department of Agriculture variety trials with some treatments trials. So examining the effect of, cattle slurry and dairy sludge and poultry manure pellets on crops, and looking at some of the biostimulants and so on. So I suppose I would very much say watch this space, Elaine, that we will have more to report. We're going to be trying some of this, the intercropping trial work that Sheila is doing, Sheila Alves in Oak Park. We're going to be bringing some of that out onto organic farms as well, which is great. And we'll be able to measure. I suppose we have to have measurable data and good scientific data to point the way, so that we make organic tillage farming more efficient. Because we would like to get a more consistency in yield, I would say. As I say, I'm only in this job a short while, but I have seen huge variations in yield on organic tillage farms this year. I know this is a tough year, but just from speaking to, and this is one of the things, you meet some great individuals who are very forthcoming, no way secretive about their operation, their yields. And I've heard all the stories, warts and all. And, if we can get to a stage where we can all improve our efficiency or our yields and how we do things, that's what we're here for. And this is why we need that bit of, research to drive that on.
Okay, Martin, we'll get stuck into the questions from the audience. First question, availability of certified organic seed varieties. Is this an issue, or will it be an issue? And is the derogation for conventional seed, is that something that you could see going in a few years?
Well, hopefully it's not going to go anytime soon, the derogation. I think, once a case can be made that there's a shortage of seed, of particular varieties we want, I think that derogation should stay if we, but it is a challenge getting, you can't just get the variety you want sometimes, and not like the conventional farmer that has the choice from the Department of Agriculture list and just goes and picks one of 8 varieties or 2. They generally can get them. So you mightn't be able to get what you want. But look, at the derogation is there, that if a particular variety isn't available as organic certified, that you can get undressed seed of that variety. But it isn't straightforward accessing the seed you want. Look at it. I'm not going to say it's all rosy. Yeah.
And there's a database there as well at the moment for seed.
There is a database there for seed, it's not the most straightforward database, I think, looking stuff up. But look, there are some seed suppliers, companies there that are very, very good at sourcing stuff too, you know what I mean? And look, we know, I don't want to go mentioning company names, but there's some very good operators there, and they're very good at coming back to you. And if you did request them to maybe access a particular variety for you, they will try hard to get it for you, so.
And if the demand grows for cereal, they will respond to the demand if there's a need there for it.
Yeah. Like right now I'm in the process of trying to source organic protein seed to try these trials out, and trying to get specific varieties. And they may not necessarily be fully organic, but like, we need to get access to this, because we want to improve how we do things. And I think it's important for a few years that we have a derogation to try things as well, that we can try out certain varieties too, so.
Would interest here in the combi crops, Martin. Somebody here, they're dairy farmers, and they're wondering, the combi crops, are they cut or as silage, or what way are they harvested?
Yeah, so you have a number of choices. Some farmers, livestock farmers, will pit it, will cut it, as fermented. We'll call it like a whole crop. You'll cut it 3 to 4 weeks before it would have reached full maturity, and you're kind of cutting it when the cereal component of the grain is gone through the soft cheddar cheese. It's just starting to form a dough around that stage, and you go by the cereal ripening rather than the pea where it's at. And very, very good high performance silage. I know down in Purcell's farm last year, when I was down there for the open day, they were saying they were able to fatten continental cattle on good combi crop silage, combi crop. So that's one option. Another option is you can take it a bit further. You can crimp it. You can bring it further. You can treat it with propionic acid. You can, roll it and put it into ration. There are some tillage growers there too that are very well set up at this, and they're rolling the combi crop, treating it with propionic acid, and then selling it, out to the livestock farmers. So there's a number of different ways you can
And then
harvest.
maybe advice another about the seeding rate. Is there advice as regards to peat to cereal, maybe to kind of
Yeah.
avoid lodging, but also control weeds on the other side?
That was, I showed you a picture earlier there actually down in Kildalton College of where the cleavers were, but that was actually a trial that was set up to actually look at that. And we looked at a 50-50 of pea to cereal. We used oats in one section and we used barley in the other. And we had the peas mixed with it. So we went 50-50, we went 60-40, we went 40-60 the other way. And they all plots looked well, but one of the I suppose the highest the highest yielding, I think if you have the oats did better, where the oats was 40% with the 60% pea. Probably because the oats grows a bit taller, has a better scaffolding effect than barley. Barley generally wouldn't grow as tall. Maybe the drought as well would have meant barley didn't grow as tall this year. So the barley actually benefited this year by being maybe 60% of the mix. But you can grow a combi crop on the same day in 4 different fields on one farm, and all 4 fields could look different in June. So it depends on what's going on in that field in terms of fertility or maybe weed burden or so on. But what I would say is the barley is not as aggressive to get going in a year like what we got this year. So it's, in other words, one of the fundamental foundations for yield in barley is its ability to tiller. And because of the drought, for so long back in May, barley didn't really tiller very well and was very, very short. And that didn't really suit we call it the combination in that combi crop, that you are better off with a crop that can hit the ground running, that's a little bit more aggressive at scavenging for whatever little bit of nitrogen is there as well. Barley wouldn't be as good at scavenging for the nitrogen as maybe the oats. So I think in that situation, the oats would have turned out better in certain situations. But there's no hard and fast rule in terms of the combi crop ratio. I suppose I was afraid initially that if you had too much peas in it, that it would lodge, that it would be just too much for it to cope with. But what I would say is maybe the oats is better scaffolder than the barley if we get a year like this year. Okay, so it's this is why we need the work though. This is why, and this is
Yes.
kind of the work we're going to be doing on the growing organics farms, Elaine. So hopefully we'll be better equipped in a year or two to give you good data on that.
Okay, and when we're storing it then, Martin, is the demand for dried or popcorn?
The demand, I would say there's an equal demand. It just depends on if it's dried. It's great because it's you wouldn't have to treat it with the popcorn like in 2014. So if you want to be more assured that you have a product that's like, let's say we don't get 2022 type conditions every so often when the moisture content is down at 14. So I would say it's a safer process would be to treat it with the propionic acid, to have it treated for more long-term storage, so that the end user who might be using it over a number of months can be sure of its quality and that quality stability over the number of months. So I would nearly favor a preservation technique that'll keep it in good nick over the whole feeding season. So that's all I'd
Okay.
say to that one.
Just somebody here, very specific question, but they have already 3 fields of rape and a field of winter wheat planted already. So how would this be treated for this year? So let's say, I presume this person's thinking, like, if they're going to organics,
Yeah.
how is this treated?
So those fields, that's fine. You can effectively do what you like to them until the 1st of January, and then no chemicals, no fertilizer after the 1st of January. That'll be your startup date. So I doubt there'll be anything done with the weather we've had. I don't think there'll be any field work anyway done in the next 6 weeks between now and the 1st of January. So effectively, whatever you've done to date is okay. That's because your conversion date, it's what you do from the 1st of January onwards. You're effectively, I don't want to call the word sterilizing the ground, but you're making it chemical free from the 1st of January onwards. So it doesn't matter what you did up until that point. Those fields can come in to the scheme. Okay. And as I say, the same rules apply in terms of when will your first fully symbol for when you have full organic status on those crops. So for someone in that situation, it'll be 2026 harvested crops that'll be before they're fully organic. I should have mentioned, Elaine, I didn't mention actually in conversion feed. I didn't mention about year 2, so maybe I should just mention. So for example, ourselves who came in there last January, and as I say, we sold our grain conventionally. Next year when we sow now this coming spring, we'll be able to sell, say, for example, if we had oats next spring, we could sell that as in conversion oats. So that effectively means the organic livestock farmer that buys it off us could buy up to 25% of their feed requirement as in conversion feed. So if we had four different organic livestock buyers, in theory, we could sell all our feed as in conversion feed and get a premium for our feed above conventional. So I hope I said that right. Yeah.
Yep, you did. Just somebody maybe here thinking of from partial conversion. If they grow winter barley on the conventional part, can they grow spring barley on the organic part of their farm?
My understanding of that, now this is one to check with the OCB.
No, sorry, this is winter barley and spring
barley. Yeah, no.
Yes, yeah.
Having chatted to one of the OCBs there at the ploughing match there to clarify this one, they would say no, because they both look the same when you harvest them. They're both barley samples of grain, so they're going to be, tipped up in a shed. How do you tell the difference between spring barley and winter barley in the shed? So they have to be differentiable at all stages of production, basically. So by the time it gets to harvest, and the harvested product looks the same. So that's why, it wouldn't be, you'd have to, have them on, you could only grow one, I suppose. So you'd have to go a different species, go oats or go wheat, Now, one of the things I would say is spring wheat did very, very well as crops go this year on organic tillage farms. It seemed to cope better with the drought than some of the other crops, So
it needs to be something you need to be conscious of, though.
Just to be conscious of it, yeah.
Yeah. Just this, not tillage, but maybe from the beef end of things, somebody has an out farm that they want to put into organics. Can I leave this out there for having a conventional beef herd and an organic beef herd? Is that permitted?
Say that again. They have
have an out farm and they don't want to put the out farm into organics because it may be sold or rented, but can they leave out an out farm and then have a conventional beef herd and an organic beef herd?
Oh no, you can't have it. You could have a conventional sheep herd and organic beef herd, but not the same species of animal. And I assume that's what they're at there. Yeah,
yes, that would be seen as what's called parallel production. And you're correct there, Martin. You wouldn't be permitted to do that. No. Do you, crystal ball? Do you think that? Do you ever see that dairy farmers having to pay dairy farmers for their slurry? What's your opinion on that?
Pay dairy farmers for their slurry. I would have seen it. I would have probably seen it the other way around. Being a tillage farmer here, I'd say we should be getting it free. It's an issue. It's the dairy farmers' issue that they have all this slurry. So I would imagine it's a case of the most a tillage farmer would do be paying for the spreading of it. Like, I know the arrangements that are currently in place. I don't know any tillage farmer that would be paying for dairy slurry at the moment, and I don't believe anyone would. Because they are actually in a lot of situations accommodating the dairy farmer to get it off the farm. Yeah. So don't want to land myself in too much controversy about what I might say, so I'll leave it at that.
Well, we'll move on then to the next one. What about any information or about, have you come across anybody growing crops for seed for organic tillage farmers?
There are, and there's opportunities there to, some of the seed companies might be interested in you growing for that. That opportunity is there, and there are some organic farmers already doing it and getting a premium for their seed. So
where would you go for information on that?
I suppose you'd contact one of the seed companies like, Gold Crop or Seed Tech, and I asked them would they have a contract, So just getting back to that one, Elaine, just on the slurries and so on, I do think, look, it's a problem it's an issue that won't go away anyway, all this slurry, where it's to go and all. And I really feel strongly that organic or tillage farmers especially should be looking into that grant of 70% to build on-farm slurry storage facilities, whether you're a conventional or an organic farmer. I think it should be looked at, because if you have the ability to store slurry on your farm that you could then apply out in your crops. And one of the things I would also say that definitely should be looked into is the whole area of this separation of the liquid and the solid fraction. Because when you extract out the liquid from the slurry and you're left with the solid fraction, you're left with a very, very good source of phosphorus in the solid fraction. And that is something that could be transported miles and miles. The trouble with slurry, as we know it, is if you go more than 4 or 5 miles up the road, it's now becoming maybe not cost effective. Okay, especially at around 7 miles would be where you'd consider a round trip of where you mightn't call it fully justified. But if you could move the phosphorus element of it, that far, it'd be terrific. And the other thing is what's left in the liquid slurry is mainly nitrogen and potassium, and it's much more liquidy. It doesn't have all the fibrous stuff in it, so it's not blocking up the pipes on these injection systems. And if you wanted to umbilical cord and pipe it out to fields, so for example, an organic farmer could put in slurry storage facility, take in what's left of the liquid fraction of slurry, and then be able to pump that out onto their crops during the growing season without heavy equipment going out on it. Like, we need to look at this technology and see, can we adopt it onto farms, you know.
Maybe somebody that wants to grow cereals and doesn't have facilities for storage. Are there any stipulations where if you didn't have an immediate buyer, you don't have storage, basically, could it be stored on a conventional farmer's isolated shed? So could it be stored?
You'd have to check that. I'd say ask the OCB about that if it was allowed. I'd be surprised if you're allowed to go to, and really what I would say is don't go there. In other words, you've got to have the infrastructure in place, or a market or a plan in place. Don't go growing crops unless you have shed storage space to store it, or that you definitely have a sale of that crop straight from the field. It's certainly, and it's a little bit like going back to as well, think about what you're growing especially in year one. But even for the existing livestock farmers that are there, I suppose I've been focusing more so on conventional farmers going organic. But if we take the traditional the livestock organic farmer there that may be considering growing their own feed, be careful again. You still need to make sure, have you got the infrastructure, the shed space, the storage to store the grain when it comes in? Be prepared, have it ready in place. And have you got a reliable contractor? You possibly don't have all the machinery yourself to do the work. You don't want to be left this year, crops maybe not harvested and so on. And have you got the soil suitable? I see fields that haven't been harvested yet, not organic fields, but these are conventional tillage fields that are still not cut, say. Now, I know it was an unprecedented season we got in harvest, but the common denominator with all those fields that are not cut yet is soil type. They're heavy, heavy fields. You'd wonder, should they be in tillage to begin with? Should they not be in grass? So it's whether you're conventional tillage or organic tillage farming, don't increase the odds of failure, I suppose what I'm saying. So don't try forcing a round peg into a square hole if it's not possible. So think about the fields you're trying to put tillage into, or you could be set up for failure. Yeah.
Any merchants out there around the country buying bulk full symbol grain?
Martin? Any merchants buying bulk full symbol grain? The only operator I'm aware of would be just the Irish Organic Feeds down there in Cork, as far as I know. But the rest of them would be importing symbol, full symbol ration, like so Kieran and Milling and so on. So I don't believe there's anyone buying Irish organic full symbol, except for, as I say, our Irish Organic Feeds maybe down in Cork. So that's to the best of my knowledge now, Elaine, unless you know of anyone else. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And maybe the final question here is, you mentioned the organic farming scheme, but is there TAMS grant for grain storage facilities? What is available under TAMS?
There is. So look, I sometimes have a friend of mine who always is talking about follow the money, and to use his phrase, you could literally, if you wanted to follow the money, you go down this route of organic, because look, the TAMS grant is 20% more attractive than the ordinary TAMS. So you'll get a 60% TAMS grant if you're an organic farmer, tillage farmer, and you can apply then for your grain store, or all the list of items that a conventional tillage farmer can apply for. They can also apply for under the organic farming TAMS scheme. And but they also have a list of organic equipment they can also go for then that they wouldn't be able to if they weren't organic. Okay, so but back to the grain storage one, yes, it's 60% TAMS grant rate for that, Elaine.
Okay, we've come to the end, so you can catch your breath there, Martin. Okay, everybody, thank you very much, Martin. I think you've got a very good overview there, and challenges, opportunities, the sector, the scheme. As Martin, if anybody wants to come to you, as say offline, you put your email address there and they can send you an email, no problem at all. So thank you very much, Martin. Just to say that, shout out that we're going to be joined tomorrow. William Deasy is joining us from the hort side of things, and he's going to give an overview on all things organic horticulture. So maybe there's cereals there. Yeah, this was tillage, so it could fit in very well there as well, the whole area of horticulture. And I'd say you would agree there, Martin.
Definitely. I'd say anyone that may be considering it, tune in tomorrow morning. Yeah, no, I know William will give an excellent talk on the opportunities, maybe for field scale tillage, organic. Yeah.
Oh, and on that note, everybody, take care. Thank you so much to yourselves for coming in and joining us this morning. And we'll be back again tomorrow morning, same time, same place, different subject, organic horticulture. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.